Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Welcome once again to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. My name is Bryant Francis. I'm a contributing editor at Gamasutra.com. I am here today playing an interesting game that came out a year ago called Ghost Recon Wildlands, or I should say Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands. I am playing this because it is almost GDC. GDC's next week. And in the lower left-hand corner, one of our wonderful guests that we always have here on the channel is giving a talk about this game. Wonderful guest. I'll let you introduce yourself in a moment, but Alex, you're hiding down there. Stop hiding. Hey. Who are you? Why are you here?
Hey, hey, Bryant, how's your GDC going?
Good. This is my GDC's already begun. That's what I'm doing this. Yeah.
I just got to warm up for next week. I got to get this banter ready because I'm not going to have any brain cells left. My name is Alex Waro. I'm an editor somehow still at Gamasutra.com. And we are joined, as Brian alluded to earlier, by a very special guest. Very special guest. Would you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Hi, thanks, guys. And hi, everyone. My name is Nouredine Abboud, and I'm the senior producer on Ghost Recon Wildlands.
Nice. So Bryant is an expert at Ghost Recon Wildlands,
Yep.
So he won't need any help.
No help whatsoever.
Definitely nobody bring a strategy guide onto the channel with you just in case Bryant gets stuck. That's fantastic. Nouredine, before we launch into this, let's preface it. You're speaking at GDC next week, is that right? You're part of a producer talk, I think.
Yes, actually, I have a talk on Tuesday, 11:20 a.m. part of the producer boot camp.
Yeah.
And it's a module part of the whole GDC that focuses on basically tricks about how to be a producer. And the name of my talk is Creativity and Processes, the Production Challenge of Mega Projects.
Yeah, I think, we'll try not to dig too much into your talk because I know you want to save that stuff for next week. But the title alone, I love. What is... Because I feel like at every stage in game development, it has, depending on what project you're working on, it can feel like a mega project, right? No matter when you're doing it or where, or how many people you have. But here you mean something very specific and something I think that not a lot of developers have experience with. What do you mean by a mega project? What is, in your mind, a mega project in game dev today?
All right, so I will just give you one figure, a simple one. There's 3,000 people credited in the credits of Ghost Recon Wildlands. The credits go on and take a while to finish if you try to watch them. So we're really talking about a big project. If I add a couple of other figures, Ghost Recon Wildlands took us 5 years to deliver, and we had 7 studios working on it inside Ubisoft. So this is what I call a mega project.
Yeah, that's insane. I think I work with a maximum of 20 people ever. I can't imagine trying to coordinate a team or teams that number in the thousands and trying to finish one project. So let's I really don't want to talk about your talk, which is going to be really tricky, right? But tell me a bit about sort of your path as a game developer and how you came to be leading these massive teams and what you learned along the way. Because I assume you didn't start out as a producer on teams that were hundreds and hundreds of people strong.
Actually, no, but actually not at all, because, the game industry has evolved a lot. And, I was born in the 70s. I started as a small-scale coder on Atari ST. I was 12 years old, and so I wasn't doing it as a professional job. And of course, at the time, you could make a game or a demo with a couple of guys. So that was my first taste of this game development. Later on, I graduated from a business school, and where I learned a few things about management, marketing, business, financial elements, to add to my technical background that I got through coding in the early days, where you could actually code everything in assembly, and you were not using any, let's say, evolved languages, so you were really digging into the core of the engine. And also, then I had a career. I've started in the music industry as a music producer. Then I moved in the advertising agency business. I was running an advertising agency for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I created my own game company where I was the creative director. And finally, I joined Ubisoft in 2006. And at the time, I was the producer on Ghost Recon Wildlands 2 on PC. At the time, I worked with the studio called Green in Sweden. I was what we call a third-party producer, so I was based in Paris and working with a team outside. And yes, if I just look at the little bit of the years I spent at Ubisoft from 2006 to now, the projects have really changed in terms of size. But if I actually compare it to how it was looking when I was coding on Atari ST, they really actually moved from very, very, very small projects to gigantic projects.
Yeah, no doubt. Real quick before we move on, can you tell me a bit about what it was like to work as a music producer in the 90s?
In fact, also very specifically, I was working in a label that was in the techno subgenre, so like electronic music. And we also did some rap music. And, it was a very difficult time at the time because it was exactly the moment where internet was coming. You could feel the death to a certain extent to an industry, and you didn't have yet the new one coming. So those years were quite hardcore. However, and this is really a little bit of the link that I found between all the jobs I had and also all the stuff I do outside of a professional situation. I also worked on personal things about movies or things like that, is that at the end of the day, you put aside, let's say, the business aspects, and you focus more on the art. I'm looking at the screen here. It's written Gamasutra, the art and business of making games. I can tell you that when I was working in the music industry, there was really the business side of things, and it wasn't looking that good. It was quite tough. But at least we could focus on the art side of things, and we had great fun at a time where, like techno was really new, and you really had this divide between people who would be listening to electronic music and people who would consider it's not at all something appropriate.
Yeah, and I feel like that has changed. It's been a decade or three. It's been a while. I feel like there's a little more mainstream acceptance of that kind of music. And in the same way, I wonder if similar things have happened in games. There was a time when games like, say, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds or games like this, they would be sort of not niche, but they'd have sharp demarcations between players who loved them and players who were just absolutely not into that and wanted a different genre. And now it feels like most games are so big that they contain multiple genres are now kind of meaningless because games can be so big they can contain almost everything within them. You especially have a lot of experience working on those kind of games.
Actually, if I may add, I have a little bit of experience in the game, but also in another case, which is also very similar. It's pen and paper RPG. I've been a dungeon master since, the 80s. I ran my first game as a DM when I was 13 years old. And if I look at the relationship and the acceptance of this culture of pen and paper role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, or all those kinds of games, how they kind of changed. And you actually have even right now a revival of the 80s that also includes a revival of Dungeons and Dragons. I think if I look at the games, there's a simple thing. Let's be clear. Ghost Recon has been on for many, many years. It's a very well-known franchise. However, if I look at the size of the population of the people playing them, between the first Ghost Recon and the most recent one, there's nothing comparable and really changed. And yes, it goes also with this wide array of content. It's not so much about the focus, but now there's so many things you can do, and you have so many hours of gameplay inside the game.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right, and we need to dig into that. But before we do, I really want to know what was the first pen and paper game you DM'd, and what do you tend to play most often, if you still play?
So, I actually, I'll tell you three things. First, the first time I played, I still remember I was 11 years old. It was in gaming club, and it was a Saturday afternoon, and there was a open day for new people, and everybody was 16 or 17. And I was like the 11 years old guy, and,
Sure.
and I was there with my friends. I can just imagine how horrified those guys were about being forced to play with those young kids.
Yeah.
So this game, I clearly remember it was Dungeons and Dragons, and at the time I still remember many years later I found the module, and I think we were playing something like half orcs or orcs that were turned into very small characters by a magician, and we were in a sewer, in the sink of the sewer, trying to find something. So this was my first experience. Then I did like many people, I've gone through Dungeons and Dragons, and you move into Call of Cthulhu. Then you go into Shadowrun, Cyberpunk. You get a bit older. You try the vampire stuff. You basically go through the whole array. And yes, and even if I look at the people who are working on Ghost Recon Wildlands, we have, for instance, Eric Simon, who is our word designer, who's been in the game industry for many years. When I was actually 12 years old, he was designing some of the games that I was playing. And for instance, he designed content for Stormbringer, for Hawkmoon, that were big games in the 80s. And right now he's working in the team. So that was my personal experience. And actually, this is a teasing. Be clear, I will tell nothing. But if you come to my lecture, I have a surprise between pen and paper RPG and Ghost Recon Wildlands. I won't say more.
Yeah, we can't spoil that here. That'd be.
I was gonna ask that. That was like my next question.
We have something, and there's a reason why I'm talking about it, because I can tell you that there's something, and I'm sure that people in the audience, but also in general at the GDC, will be happy. And yes, we have something we've been cooking that will be showing at that time, that is also going to show a larger array of content about Ghost Recon. Because if you look at Ghost Recon, and specifically Ghost Recon Wildlands, this is a fully alive world and a gigantic world. We spent 5 years working on it. There's 256 square kilometers. You have a good 100 hours of playtime without looking into the PvP. You can play all the missions in any order you want, and you can do it in solo, co-op, and also PvP. So this big amount of content, it can be enjoyed in many ways, and that's why we think that giving players other ways of enjoying it and playing our game is good. So that's why we have other ideas, and we actually even use some of the approaches that you can find in the different businesses we mentioned. What I mean by that is that the music industry and the understanding of the impact of music is very important for a creative director. The fact that the soundtrack of the game is inspired by rock music and local music is also coming from the fact that our creative director has also a background in the music. And the same way, the depth of the world of Wildlands is also inspired by the fact that our word main designer has also a background in RPGs.
Yeah, it's been and we won't spoil your surprise. That's fun, but it's very reassuring to me. Like, obviously I also grew up playing D&D and White Wolf and Shadowrun and all that stuff. And when I was a kid, at least, I don't know about your experience, but there was a stupid line between like tabletop games and video games, right? Like some kids were, if you were into games, some people were into video games, some people were into tabletop games, and sometimes they wouldn't hang out together, like on the quad or whatever. Like there was a line. And then growing up, it was such a nice thing to see in talking to so many developers that so many have integrated their experiences, either playing tabletop games or continuing to play them now. And that informs the way they make video games. And like that's not a huge surprise, much like modding. I mean, like tabletop games seem like a prime pathway into game design in general because there's so much room for creativity and expression. But it's always fun to see how those experiences shape developers differently. Did that influence your interest in programming and in making games at all, or were they just two separate things for you?
No, it's all. I mean, to keep it very simple. And again, if you look at the Gamasutra motto, the art and business, I think it's really, at the end of the day, the business is also fueling the art. And the question is very quickly is, if you love games and you love the idea of thinking about words that are bigger than the word that you see every day, which can be thinking about new stories in RPGs or spending hours in online world. At the end of the day, there's two things that happen, that all those things are related. And at the end of the day, you're in a word. You can be in a word if you're watching a movie. You can be in a word if you're reading a book, if you're playing a pen and paper RPG, and you're in a word when you're playing a video game like Ghost Recon Wildlands. So one, it influences because it's all connected. And also it influences it because if you look at the business side of things, if you want to be making those games, you need to have a good understanding of the business, but also of what you are doing. And so I consider myself that it's very important to have a culture that encompasses a wide array of topics. You need to have a culture in games, you have a culture in movies, you need to have a culture in music, you need to have a culture in RPGs, because if you connect all those dots, then it means that those are each time a moment where you can train yourself, your brain, and your creative skills in order to be able to create those words. So for me, it's all big training. And even right now, I'm 44 years old. I'm still training myself to all those things. And I play pen and paper RPGs on a regular basis with friends and my kids. I play video games with friends and my kids. I watch movies or I look into music. And the same way, for instance, Eric Cousion, our creative director, he plays the guitar on a daily basis. And this really informs his capability of being creative and creating these massive open worlds when he comes to the office.
Yeah, totally. I should jump in real quick here and say, since we have someone in chat asking a question about whether there's a new Splinter Cell Ghost Recon, this stream is for Gamasutra audiences ahead of GDC, and so we typically are talking to other game developers and to game dev students and people who want to get into games. So if you have any questions about how the game was made or what Nouredine's experience has been, please just chuck them in there and we'll try to get to them. I'm curious to know, when you joined Ubisoft in 2006, did you join as a producer or did you join somewhere else first and move into production?
I joined right away as a producer. So for one specific reason. Actually, to be very clear, what happened is that, and it's a good way of talking of one of the topics you mentioned, is how to break into the game industry. And actually, I remember very clearly, it was in 2003. I was working in the advertising business. I loved the business. We were very creative, had lots of great ideas, but I wanted to be closer to the creative jobs that I liked. And I was thinking, okay, so how am I going to get into this business? If I send my resume, am I going to be hired? I have lots of experience or quite a lot. I was at the time 30 years old, but I was already running my own advertising online agency for many years. And I had experience in coding or things like that. However, when I looked at the chance of getting hired, they were not gigantic. And to be clear, it's very different if you're young, if you studied all your time about video games, but if you're trying to get into the game industry a little bit later, it's not very easy, because you receive lots of resumes of people who have lots of experience on side activities, but it's very difficult to know how they can move into the industry. Sometimes it's possible, it happens, but not always. So at the time, I had the opportunity to launching my own game company, to funding it, and to start it and work on it. So in this case, and actually I was the creative director of this game studio. I worked with one of my old friends from the business school and with another guy who worked with me in the music industry. We launched it. We hired guys. We were quite successful initially. Finally, for some technological reasons, and we were not able to finalize what we were doing. We were able to make sure that we get side jobs. We worked as a subcontractor. The whole story ended well. We didn't lose money. We didn't go bankrupt, and I'm still friend with those people. So a big success in terms of friendship, etc.
Yeah.
However, even if I had failed this goal, I was able to create myself a background that made it possible for Ubisoft to say, "Hey, come on, guy, why not hire you right away?"
Sure.
And in my case, the mix of many years of experience launching a company, managing creative industry, coding on my spare time, mixed to the years of experience of launching my game studio, running it, and a small studio. At the time, at the peak, I think we were 10 or 11, so we were doing everything, coding, voice recording, editing, etc. Of course, it's much easier to hire you. However, there's two little things to add. I was hired as a third-party producer, which means that I was working with external studios. So I'm not sure I would have been hired as an internal producer right away. And also, the size of the projects at the time was nothing compared to the situation right now. So let's say in my case, that's the reason why I was hired right away as a producer. Right now, we have actually two ways of having people move into the production job. Either they do it as people who right away start as associate producers or production coordinators or project managers, but let's say with a smaller scope to manage. Or we have people transitioning either because they are in QC or in tech or in art, and after a number of years, they like to be leading the efforts as opposed to actually working directly on it, and then they transition. We don't have so many people hired right away as a producer role, but again, right now I'm talking about very big projects and also about the maturity of the industry.
Yeah. So I
was going to jump. We have a question in chat that I think is relevant to something I was going to ask about. Fancy Ben Book asks if the game was developed through Ubisoft Worldwide Network or only in Paris. To clarify, if you scroll down and click on the button we've got that has Nouredine's talk there, you'll see that it includes that 7 studios were involved in making Wildlands. However, Ben's question is, how did you manage to keep with different time zones and manage deadlines with companies all over the world?
All right, so first, to help you understand, I'm going to give you the list of the studios, and you're going to notice something. So the list of the studios: Paris, Annecy, Montpellier in France, Newcastle in the UK, Bucharest, Belgrade in Eastern Europe, and Milano in Italy. So what you notice is that they are all in very close time zones. So that's the first answer, which is the best way to have no issues managing time zone is not to have extra time. It really helps.
Yeah,
that's a good
and
answer.
Yes, yes, to be clear, if the time zones are too big, it can be an issue to certain specific types of collaboration. However, and this is where you're going to understand the 3,000 people credited. Here I'm talking about the development studios. But if I'm going to add the testing, for instance, you can look into the credits. We had testers in Pune, in India. We have 3D artists in Shanghai, in China, and so on. So how did we do to manage with people who with more time differences? This is where you end up into the details of management, which is you need to agree on the deliverables with a clear mandate. You need to make sure that both sides know exactly what is requested. You need to agree on moment of communication. So the same way that right now it's 8 o'clock in the Paris studio and it's 12 o'clock your time, there's cases where you need to accept to work in different moments of your ideal time zone. However, the biggest thing, and this is for me the core thing, Actually, it's not something I'll be talking too much at during my talk, but so that's why I can easily talk about it. Seniority is very important. Let's be clear. We are lucky with the game industry with one thing. There's quite a strong sense of, let's say, a sort of common culture between many people who are developers. If you're born in Eastern Europe or in France or in Asia or in the US and you've been playing games in the last few years, you actually have the same, let's say, video game culture. Mm-hmm. The way it helps is that it's much easier to communicate, because if we'd be building, let's say, diplomatic content like political content or things that are, let's say, more culturally related country by country, it will be probably difficult. I have the experience of advertising. Advertising is very different country by country, and there's a very different culture in advertising country by country. In the games, it's a very international culture. So the first thing that helps is that it's easy to talk to people who have the same background because they understand what you're talking about. And the second thing, people are happy to work remotely, and they're very fluent with the tools, like simple tools, like Skype or Link, these sort of little tools, and they actually know how to interact. You need face-to-face, and I'll be talking about it during my presentation about how we organized it and what are the key ways to succeed in major productions. But what I can say is that the fact that the people have a common background, are at ease to work with all the tools, are in not too difficult time zones, and are as senior as possible, which means that they can work as much remotely as possible. Those are some of the key pillars of working on a massive game with people all over the world.
Got it.
Yeah. I won't say more because some of the other tricks of the trade you will be during my talk. Yeah. But those ones I can easily talk because I'm not going to be focusing them the talk on those ones.
Thanks for that answer, because I think that helps. Sometimes when we're told about how many Ubisofts are operating, sometimes as simple as we centralize games by time zone is something that's it doesn't seem like an obvious answer until it's stated out loud.
And again, I will just add one thing, and actually, I'm the game Ghost Recon Wildlands producer, and I can talk about it very openly. Yeah. I can't talk for all the Ubisoft games or Ubisoft as a company, and I'm not saying it in a bad way. What I mean by that is that I don't know actually how all the other projects are organized, and are they all following this approach? The answer is no. And also some producers might have different tricks to get it done. So that's why, yes, in the case of Ghost Recon Wildlands, we were able to manage it with the time zone approach.
Right on. My follow-up question is, I was talking to Ashraf Ismail, who directed Assassin's Creed Origins a few months ago, and he talked about how when different studios were creating content for Assassin's Creed, what he observed was that every studio, it was the content wouldn't even be that organized by area or type, but because he could see behind the scenes, he could identify what studio was working on what. And he talked about how different studios brought different flavors to their part of the work, and there was a way in the stuff that wound up being player facing. There's obviously between a studio that makes game content and a studio that's handling testing. How did you obviously if you're working, part of your talk is about managing creative goals and creative intentions. When that seemed like a really cool aspect of Assassin's Creed, that they were able to have several studios with kind of their own creative ideas. How did that affect your work when it came to Ghost Recon, having these different creative visions who were obviously aligned under the leadership stuff, but how did you manage those different tastes?
So that's a good question, and that really shows also that making games, according to me, is more like craftsmanship. So it's not so much like an industrial knowledge where it's always done in a certain way. It also depends a lot on the people and the project, and everyone are going to have a different approach. Specifically in the case of Wildlands, our approach is probably more centralized. But when I mean centralized, I don't mean that probably more decisions taken in Paris. I mean that we try more to actually make sure that we can have the same sort of approach no matter the studio. So if you take these topics, I have many studios, you can either say, I have a flavor and I'm going to build around the flavors. And I think it's what you heard from another project. Or you can have a look at it from another way, which is the way we approached it, is how can we make sure that all those people are actually going to have the same flavor. And our approach is more about communicating, meeting, handling topics where we can all have the same point of view. And, you know, to get back to the initial topic or the quick discussion we had about role-playing games, it's a little bit like when you're a dungeon master and you have lots of different characters, people playing around the table, and they all want to do it their way. And the question is how I'm going to have all those people playing the same story along the same line and have enough freedom to have fun and bring their creativity, but on the other hand, create a story together that makes sense. It's a little bit what we were doing, and I insist on the we, because it's obviously not me alone as the senior producer, the big boss of the project. It's of course the job of all the people who are leading the project with me, which is the creative director, my producers, the game director in Paris, but in all the different studios. Our key goal is how can we create a situation where the way we think and the way we operate is as closely knit as possible. And part of the answer is like I told you, like a dungeon master who's kind of trying to make sure that people work together. Mm-hmm. But it's also like a wolf pack. I love this idea, is that we hunt together. So we kind of are used to working the same way, or a little bit like the ghosts who are behind enemy lines and who are like trained professionals who know how to behave. So after a while, we're able to work in a way that if you ask a question to somebody who is based in Paris, in Bucharest, or in Milan, you will probably have a different accent. You know, I'm not sure you'll have the French accent, you'll have a different accent. Not sure it will be exactly the same. However, the goal was to have the same level of difference between the studios than what we have inside the studio. And what I mean by that, you know, if you look inside the studio, if you guys the same question to the senior producer, the creative director, the producer, it's not sure you get 100% the same answer, which is normal. We are human beings, we need to coordinate. This is fun, this is good, this is what is going to fuel the creativity, and this is what makes us come to work every morning, because we believe we can bring our capabilities on the table. Yeah. On the other hand, I think my goal is to get this with all the studios involved, and it means spending time together, knowing the people, having empathy with them, and that's why, if I get back to what I said before, from my perspective, and I'm only talking for Ghost Recon Wildlands and my approach, I think the cultural differences between the different studios are much smaller than what you could think. But again, maybe in this case, because all the studios are listed, for instance, we're based in Europe, and I wouldn't dare to comment on all the projects or at an international level. Even if I think that this a little bit like Alex, you know, when I speak to Alex about my background in D&D, yes, he said, yeah, we have the same one. Yep. And we probably don't have the same age. We probably don't have the same background. We didn't live in the same countries. But when it comes to gaming, maybe we can be brothers in arms.
Absolutely. I you know, a few minutes ago we talked about how you know, the nice thing about the game industry is that there's such a shared passion often that people tend to be very technically savvy, which is handy for remote work, but also like they tend to share a lot of the same inspirations, same influences, same interests. That I think is a real strength, but also like I think we can admit now, looking back, that like it's been a real homogenizing force that has often in the past like sort of kept new inputs and new viewpoints out. And as game dev tools become more easier to use and like cheaper to use, free, one of the most exciting things has been seeing all the new work being created by people who were not traditionally game developers. They were historians or artists or, you know, business people or marketing people or whatever. and that's been just fantastic. Musicians and everything. So I'm curious to know, as someone who does sit in these big meetings and have ideas about creative content and where things should go, when you have ideas that come in that seem like they don't jive with yours, right? Like they're from somebody who you don't see quite the same thing, or you're not eye to eye. How do you know when to listen and when to sort of step back and let that idea blossom? And how do you know when it's not a good fit for the team?
So I'd like to say two things on this. I will answer first directly to your question, and then add a little bit about my background to help. The key thing for me, and I'm very simple on this topic, it's called responsibility. If you have something to say, you need to be able to prove it or even to take responsibility. And I'm lucky because on a big project, we have, we spent 5 years on this game. So yes, we worked hard. It took us a lot of time because it's difficult. We also had time to spend on topics. So there were cases where people were strongly believers of something, and we were able to allocate them the time, the resources, or just give them the possibility to do it at one stage. And so that's for me the big thing. I really believe in this idea of responsibility. Like you said initially, if people are kind of understanding what we're doing, this is the core. Then there can be big differences. Usually we can let people do what they want. They can, for instance, if somebody is pushing to use a certain kind of music, we can tell him, what, just record or just put some fake music inside the build and let's listen to it. That's a simple example. Or the same way with the way to tell a story. I mean, you know what? Let's just spend 2 weeks on that. Let's see what happens. So that's the big thing for me. And I think it creates a positive loop, because what happens? One, people can express themselves. Two, if they succeed, it's great, because it's going to add some extra content to the game. And actually, if you're working on a big game like that with 100 hours of gameplay just at launch, and I'm not talking about the post-launch content, and if you have 256 square kilometers in the map, there's no way at all that we can fill this up by controlling everything. And we actually need people who make areas of the game or moments of the game theirs. So this is the positive loop. And even if the person fails, it's again a positive loop, because there's nothing worse to be told what you think is bad and not believing into it. And the proof of the cake is in the pudding, something like that. Of course, it doesn't mean that out of the hundreds of people, here I'm not talking about the 3,000 people credited, but about the core team, the hundreds of people at the core of the game, the core team and the key people and the backbone of the team in the 7 studios. I'm not saying that they can all do what they want and then we just see what works and what doesn't work, but we can find areas where they can prove themselves. The second thing I wanted to say was about what people can bring to the table. I will add something. I'm called Nouredine Abboud. I was born in Eastern Europe, in Slovakia. My mother is Hungarian. My dad is Algerian. I was born, behind the Iron Curtain. I spent 6 years, in Eastern Europe in quite difficult times. We moved to France when I was 6 years old. Now I've been living in France for many years. My wife is Australian, etc. So what I mean by this, I don't want to talk about my case. I want to talk about the fact that our world is changing. Diversity is happening in the society. People are traveling more, and you can see those things even inside our game and our game team. So, of course, I'm talking about my case because I'm the one who's talking here, and it's always easier to comment about yourself. But I consider that even the fact that I'm right now working on a game like that, means that I can bring to the table my personal background, and it's not as simple as the background of somebody who is from French or living in Paris. I have a diversity. I talked to you about Eric Simon, our word designer who used to be a pen and paper RPG designer, and it's the same inside the team, where we try to have as much diversity in terms of culture, gender, or belief. It's also happening just by itself because we have more and more people who actually, like you said at the beginning, are interested in games. And yes, maybe in the 80s, it was also appealing more to a subgenre of the population or subgroup, whereas right now it's appealing to a larger group of people, and it's good news because it's bringing new talent and new ideas to the table.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, I can sympathize with that. I grew up in New Jersey, and we left when I was 6, and I've never looked back. So it's the same. I want to keep digging into this topic, but there is a question in chat that maybe we can talk a little bit about production and games on. Savage X Rider 007 wants to know, are you continuing to work on the PvP balancing? They apparently don't like it as much as they would wish they would, and so that sort of makes me wonder. I mean, this game's been out for a year, and you're still working on it. And you guys are still, so like, how are you adapting and how are you continuing to apply your skills as a developer in like a post live ops world, right? Because I assume on the original GRAW 2, I think you said you started on, there probably wasn't, I don't remember, but there probably wasn't a robust post launch support scheme. But now it seems like games can be almost endless. It's hard to tell when you're sort of supposed to move on to the next project and when you need to be continuing to support it. So how have you learned to navigate that?
So first thing, it's funny that you're talking about Grow 2 PC, because I remember at the time having lots of discussions internally about how to organize our post-launch approach, the community, etc. But yes, the size of what I was referring to had nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. And if I just look at Wildlands, we had 13 updates of the game since it launched. And it's launched basically a year ago. Our anniversary was on March 7, so a little bit more than a year ago. So basically we had a little bit more than an update a month. So yes, it's clear that the post-launch content is much bigger. And yes, to be very precise, in the case of the PvP, it was released after the launch. And it's a big piece of content. And to answer to the person, we are working hard on it, and it's a big back and forth between us and the community. And the same way that we promised we will be coming with the PvP and we delivered, the same way we are putting as much energy on it because it's very important for the team. But I will add to this specifically in how to do it, and for me and for the team. I just personally, I told you after the music industry, I worked into the advertising industry, and at the time, the same way that internet came for the music business, internet arrived for advertising. And so I went through some of the golden years of the internet, like from 98 to 2003.
The Napster era.
I have to say a hands-on knowledge, not of everything, and things have changed a lot since those days. However, I have the feeling that to a certain extent, I've gone through the impact of the internet in a specific industry. I've gone through it already twice before because I've seen it in the business of the music. I've seen it in the business of advertising. Now I see it in the business of the art and business of games. And so I have some personal experience of how to navigate. But the main thing I would say, and I will just allude to it and not go into details because I'll be telling a lot of the tricks of the trade during my lecture. The key thing is that I consider that the post-launch is a good way to see how strongly organized you were before. And I think it's like, to a certain extent, a crash test. So it really gives a lot of ideas about not considering it as something that is going to be changing what you're doing, but something that is going to put stress on it. So that's the way I look at it, based on my personal experience, but based also on the team.
Yeah. I real quick to those watching either now or when it's posted later. I know it can be kind of a tease to say like, oh, we're going to talk about this in depth next week at the talk. Not everyone can come to GDC, and we totally respect that. However, all the talks are recorded, and a good portion of them make their way to the YouTube channel. So if you can't come to GDC next week, like honestly, just check out the official GDC YouTube channel. There's a decent chance that in the months to come, you will see this fantastic talk and all the others. I should also say real quick, we're owned by the same company. I forget if Brian mentioned this earlier, but Gamasutra is owned by the company that also owns GDC. So you should know about that when we say go look at the YouTube channel. Brian, how are you doing in there? We haven't really checked in on your progress.
This is fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine, Alex. Why do you ask?
You seem like you really got a handle
I think
on this.
I think I am role playing how a American operation in Bolivia would go down. Which is a backhanded way of saying sometimes competent, a lot of murder, and very confused objectives.
Yeah.
That's my own like ability to play this game while running a stream, talking, not any comment. That's not an analysis of the gameplay. That's just my own competence on display, if you will.
Well, so I'm just curious, right? Because I haven't had a chance yet to play this game. It's not a dig against the quality. I'm just more of a I just like to see my wars cloaked in orcs and elves rather than Bolivia. But I'm curious to know, like, in your experience, like, does this feel like a game that's a year old, or does it feel like a game that's fresh and new? And can you tell, like, as somebody who is approaching this project for the first time, that it's like a significantly post-launch game?
Not in the area. I mean, like, this is all very early game stuff. It's very. I mean, like, the thing that's indicated me to the most that there's like anything else going on. Oh, I can't drive through water. What am I doing? I was gonna check out that.
I can jump on this. I can jump in on this question.
Please do.
Yeah. So the key thing here. The two things. The first, I'm going to talk about the post-launch content, and then about what the game is kind of bringing to the table. And again, I'm reading the art and business. So what's the new thing? Why is it exciting? Why did I spend 5 years of my life, actually now 6 since launch, my energy, my brain, and is it true for the whole team? So if I just look at the post-launch approach, let's be clear. If you just take the game and play the game, and you haven't played the first 100 hours of gameplay, there's no way to make a difference between day one or the post-launch. Of course, we worked on tuning or correcting some issues like on every game, and obviously we were able to come to a quality that we're happy with, and the game launched in a very strong state, and we're able to polish what was needed. That said, the updates we brought in were linked to either the PvP, and so if you had bought the game at launch, you wouldn't have had the PvP, and we decided to come with it later, and this is something new. And also, we've added content, missions, either paying content with downloadable content, season pass DLCs, so we had 2 DLCs with some extra content, but also with free DLCs, and there's the example, of the Predator, the movie Predator.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of people were like, wow, that would be so cool to have the Predator in the jungle, and that we'd be so excited about it. And you know what? We did it. For the anniversary of the Predator, we were able to bring in our content, and you could actually fight against the Predator inside the game. And this is why right now, the way you look at it, it's not so much as a post-launch as in terms of update, like on a daily way, but more like added content. The second topic,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
If I may, just the second topic, which was, why did we put all our souls and energy inside this game? I will summarize it in one way, but this sentence, I had it during the 5 years of development, not from day one, because obviously we had some iteration, but very quickly, we like to say that this is the very first, it's a long sentence, the very first military shooter set in a massive open world that you can play from beginning to end in 4-player co-op or solo. So just imagine, I'm giving you this massive world, 256 square kilometers. I throw you inside this game as a soldier who can go where he wants with the vehicles, with the weapons, and you can play the missions in any order you want. There's nothing is scripted. And on top of that, you add the fact that you can play alone or up to with 3 friends, and you can even log in, log out when you want. And this kind of big sandbox environment, this was our dream. This is where we put our soul. And right now, when I look at the game, and actually when I look, at Brian playing it, and it's the first time he's playing it, he just installed the game and he's playing it. it's a little bit like a dream come true because, for years at the beginning, it was just a few words on a piece of paper or it was just ideas between us. And just imagine how difficult it can be or frustrating or how anxious you can be for 5 years, not knowing if one day it will be a reality. And I think that the big success of the game, it was in the top 10 worldwide from the sales of last year. Which is incredible for a brand like Ghost Recon, which, like you said, used to be appealing more to a smaller group of persons and who kept growing. But right now, it's like very successful and is appealing to many people. I think one of the things that really worked for the people and that the people are enjoying is really this concept of freedom. I mean, how many games do you have where we can just jump into it? Jump out of a helicopter with your parachute, be joined by friends, do a secret ops mission, then do another kind of mission, then regroup, then play PvP, then come back, etc. All I want to say here is that in terms of the new stuff we're bringing to the table, it's really about this freedom and size of world, and this is what the people who actually play the game enjoy. And maybe one day you'll have this kind of game in a different setting. But at this stage, we believe that it's a first in its kind.
Yeah, so like first of all, the Predator DLC, that is to me what brought this game to my attention. Like I'm just not a Tom Clancy's kind of guy, but the idea that a game would release post-launch content that is like just totally out of left field, and yet ideally suited to the core of what that game is, like what it means to play that game moment to moment, and is also like weirdly tied into a strange bit of pop culture from the 80s, and that it all works really well. Like that really surprised me, and I was hoping we'd get a chance to look at it today.
Sorry.
I think no. I mean, it's supposed to be hard to get to. It's tricky.
Yeah, you can't just go hunt the predator without training, man.
That's right. You got to.
No. There's no way. There's no way you can get there.
Nope.
Yeah,
forget about it. However, what I can say is,
I'm stealing a plane. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You were talking about this 80s spirit. I mean, yes, let's face it. We have a variety of people working in the team, but people who were, let's say, like 6 years old in the 80s. There's a number of cultural elements, and yes. For instance, you were talking about how we work with the different studios. I mean, just imagine how excited the people were in the 7 studios when we were like, you know what, guys? We're going to do it.
Sure.
We're going to model the Predator in 3D. We're going to have the sound. We're going to put him in the game, and he's going to be hunting you. So everybody, and I can say everybody, was like getting it, was on board, and it was reasonably easy to have this support inside the team.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm getting at here, and I know we got to wrap it up in a couple minutes, but Ubisoft is such an interesting and unique company because it's so huge, right, and so distributed. You have compared to many studios like nigh unlimited. Like I know there are still limits, there are still problems you deal with and challenges. But I remember I was at UDC a couple years ago, and I remember seeing all these talks about how studios were sharing knowledge between themselves and like sharing technologies and sharing ways for post-launch content to be updated and stuff to be networked up and everything. So as a senior producer on one of these projects, you ship a game, you spend 5 years working on it. It's a big game, big budget, lots of studios involved. And with the backing of Ubisoft, you seem basically in a position to support it nigh infinitely. I mean, I think Ubisoft has done a remarkable job of supporting some games well past where maybe people thought they would, like for For Honor or Rainbow Six Siege or this game. Like there's been very robust post-launch support. So as a producer with that kind of resources and that kind of backing, how do you know when the game is done, right? Because no game can ever be perfect. It's never going to be perfectly what you wanted it to be. So how do you know when to just let it be and say, this is it, we're done supporting it, we're moving on to something else?
Oh, so that's the question is clear. Exactly like you said, I'm the senior producer. I'm the big boss of the project. Above me, the people are not specifically working on Ghost Recon. I I have bosses. I have a very good manager above me, but the people are not specifically working on this project. They have more like a company-wide authority. And yes, I'm in situation where I need to discuss. And the guys are like, okay, how long you want to keep doing it, or what's the situation? And in fact, the discussion is very simple, and it's not a discussion of the team pushing for it or the producer pushing for it. It's very clear, and the answer is as long as the gamers are happy about it. And I think this is very important because, you know, we had a big post-launch support for Wildlands, and actually for the anniversary of the game a few days ago, I made a short video with our community manager thanking the community and also saying that we have much more to come and we can't wait to share with them. And it's still true, and I can't wait to make sure I can announce as exciting stuff as Predator. However, the answer of when are we going to stop, the answer is when people aren't interested anymore.
Okay.
And let's be clear, we are following very closely the interest of the people. We are seeing if they're happy. If they, let's take an example, we release Predator and nobody cares. Or people think it's a bad idea.
And we're done, yeah.
No, why this? Actually, we never know, and this answers to a question. This is one of the stressful questions you ask yourself as a creative person, and it puts a big stress on everyone in the project, is until it's shipped, it's not shipped. And it's true for production, it's not ready, but it's also true for the interest of people. You can make tests, analysis, have lots of meetings. It's very difficult to know if you're going to appeal to another audience. And for us, let's be clear, we try to look at everything. We look at what people are saying. We can sometimes be a little bit sad about what we hear. We can sometimes disagree. We can sometimes fully agree. One thing we never do is not care, because what is fueling our creativity, as well as our plans, is the interest of the gamers in all the countries and out there. So the answer is not in my hands. It's not necessarily in the hands of my bosses. It's a lot in the hands of the gamers.
Yeah, and I think interest is the real key there, right? Because you mentioned it a second ago. You're like, oh, we'll keep doing it as long as the gamers are happy. I'm like, let's be honest, gamers are never happy. Like, no matter what you do, no matter how many people like it, there will always be one player at least who says, no, this isn't for me. But yeah, I mean,
it's only one. It's fine.
Yeah. It's only one, it's fine. But yeah, maintaining that interest and serving that interest seems like a pretty good barometer for when when to move on. We unfortunately have to move on here in a few minutes. Bryant, is there any lingering, burning questions that you want to squeeze in?
Good. I think we can wrap it up. Nouredine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Alex. Thank you also people who are watching this, because I know that behind every game developer or every person who's following Gamasutra, there is sometimes somebody who wants to jump into the game industry, somebody who is working in the game industry. I remember the days I wasn't in the game industry and I was happy to jump in. But one thing is sure is that everybody has a passion for games. And talking about them is fantastic. And it's also fantastic to see that people are listening about it and are interested. So thanks to everyone who has an interest in this fantastic art and business.
Very cool. To get us closing out here, you have been watching the Gamasutra Twitch channel as we talk to Nouredine Abboud about his upcoming talk at GDC, and about the production of Ghost Recon Wildlands. That's also the game we've been playing today, admittedly mildly competently.
Very well.
I'm in danger of being competent here. I'm like this
You
fella.
need to play 100 hours, my friend.
Yeah, I'm only on hour 2 or something. We got to go. I still have my 900 miles to walk. But yeah, as always, we would like to remind you, as Alex said earlier, we are sibling organizations with GDC. Gamasutra and GDC are related by blood. If corporations are people and people have blood, they are related. That was creepy. Not going to go that again. We'd love it if you click the follow button, because next week we're going to be streaming from GDC a little bit with our friends at One Life Left, which is a UK radio show / podcast. After that, after a little bit of a post-GDC break, we're going to be back to talking to game developers about the art and business of making games. So if you want to know more about how the sausage gets made, join us every week, where we try to bring you some interesting conversations. With that, have a good day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Don't let the predator get you.